Hey guys, welcome to Man Medicine, where we talk about how men can optimize their health and escape the collapsing U.S. healthcare system. I'm going to talk to you guys today a little bit about GLP-1 agonists. These are these incredibly popular weight loss medications. They're not really weight loss medications. They're specifically medications that were intended initially for use with people who had type 2 diabetes. But in the clinical trials for these medications, and as they started being used for type 2 diabetics, it became pretty obvious that people would lose a tremendous amount of weight when they began these medications. And so now they're being used very widely in people who do not have type 2 diabetes, but really are just using them to treat obesity. And they have become wildly popular. There's a number of them on the market now. You may have heard, the names, the brand names like Ozembic, Bader, Victoza, Trulicity. I can't go on YouTube now or even watch television for any length of time without seeing a commercial for one or more of these drugs. They are absolutely everywhere, and they've become incredibly popular. And the popularity is just skyrocketing ever since a number of celebrities have come out and talked about how they use these. Apparently, some of the Kardashians have used these to lose weight. Most recently, I heard Elon Musk came out on Twitter and mentioned that he had lost a ton of weight, also by using one of these medications. I'm not sure which one, but poor old Elon got himself a little bit overweight, and he posted some pictures, some before and after, and I'm not sure how much he lost. I think certainly he posted not that long ago that he was down at least 30 pounds. I had heard somewhere that he lost 50 or 60 total pounds. Charles Barkley was using Mounjaro, and old Charles got a little heavy in his post-NBA retirement days, and he has lost a ton of weight as well, and he's giving full credit to Mounjaro for that. This is a picture of Remy Bader, who I had no idea who Remy Bader was, but some Hollywood person. It says here, she tried semaglutide but gained the weight back when she stopped using it. That's actually what we're going to talk about today. It's not, I'm not here to shill these drugs to you, but I'm here to tell you that they're being used so widely and haphazardly by a number of different clinics that have popped up, that I think that most of the people that use these medications, when they discontinue them, are going to regain a substantial amount of weight back. They may regain all of that weight, and my prediction is if they're not careful, they're going to rebound and gain even more weight back, just like with other crash weight loss drugs. And I want to talk with you about some potential strategies that you can take to avoid that. So because of how popular these drugs are, if you do a quick Google search, I lost count of the number of online telemedicine clinics that were shilling these drugs and offering them. Here's just a few of the different advertisements that I found. Call here, call for details, weight reduction, semaglutide, real results, real foods, weight loss that works. Major marketing for these drugs, and many of these clinics are online only. They're telemedicine. There's nothing wrong with that, but they are charging exorbitant amounts of money. People are willing to pay that amount of money because these drugs, they really do work. And I'm going to show you some of the data on there. Some of them have documented weight loss that rivals bariatric surgery in some cases. So you can imagine there's a lot of folks out there who have tried and failed everything under the sun in terms of medication to help them lose weight, but they don't want to have bariatric surgery. So now this is offering them a ray of hope, or maybe something that they could use instead of going down the surgical route, which I support that. But the cost is extremely high. They're charging through the nose for some of this stuff. This is one example here. 6 weeks is $600. 12 weeks is $850. Pricing includes semaglutide. Okay, great. Lipotropic, MIC, B12, and supplies. Okay, I did another video. Lipotropic, MIC, and B12 is bullshit. Okay, they're just taking your money. It doesn't do anything. But also very popular in some of these windmill clinics. So anyway, enough on that. So what the heck is GLP? So GLP is it's a peptide. It's a naturally occurring peptide. It's made both in your gut and in your brain. Okay. and it's made in these cells in your gut called L cells, the letter L, also made in the brainstem. And GLP-1 is secreted when you eat food, and it has a wide range of effects. I'm going to just briefly touch on some of those. This is a really nice 3D model of what the actual GLP-1 molecule looks like. It's pretty cool. So the thing about GLP-1, when it occurs naturally in your body, is it is secreted, but it doesn't stick around very long. I mean, we're talking about like a half-life literally of like 2 minutes. So when this peptide was discovered, Big Pharma immediately went to work on like, okay, how do we tweak this to make it stick around longer? Because it has all of these, potentially beneficial effects if we could just get it to last a little bit longer. So this little cartoon here shows, I mean, it has effects on the brain, the gut, and the liver. Decreases food intake, delays gastric emptying. It actually improves the efficiency of insulin secretion, so it helps bring blood sugar down. It basically does, if you're an obese type 2 diabetic, it like pretty much checks every box, okay? But if it only sticks around for 2 minutes, just giving you more GLP-1 is not necessarily going to help you. So that research spawned two broad classes of medications. One is these GLP-1 agonists, which is what we're focusing on today, and then also these DPP-4 drugs, which basically inhibit the breakdown of your own GLP-1. So they essentially make your own GLP-1 stick around a little bit longer. We're not going to talk about those today. Those are great drugs for type 2 diabetes. I occasionally prescribe them myself, but GLP-1 is what we're going to talk about today. These are two papers that will be. This is kind of the meat and potatoes of what we're going to talk about today. This first one here, Advanced Therapeutics from 2021, weight loss and maintenance related to the mechanism of action of GLP-1 receptor agonists. And then this one here, this is Reviews of Endocrinology, Metabolism, and Discord, 2014, Effects of GLP-1 on Appetite and Weight. So two good papers if you're interested in looking at that. This was a big one from the New England Journal of Medicine, and this is just their little summary sheet that I wanted to show you. This really got a lot of attention in the endocrine world and in general medicine as well. And this is looking specifically at tirzepatide, which is brand name Mounjaro, which I think is generally considered to be the most potent of these, at least in terms of weight loss. And you can see the charts here, based on the dose. As the dose increased, the weight loss just increased as well, certainly compared to placebo. So you see here mean weight change at 72 weeks at 5, 10, and 15 milligrams. So at the 15 milligram dose, I mean, at 72 weeks, we're at like 21% weight loss, which is really substantial. I mean, it rivals bariatric surgery, to some extent. So this got a lot of press in the medical world, and this is why sales of Mounjaro have like skyrocketed. Okay, they're very popular. I have personal friends who take it. I have yet to prescribe Mounjaro. I've prescribed the other ones, but it is extraordinarily expensive. So it's not a generic medication at this point. There's a lot of cost to it. Shows here the side effect profile. I'm not going to go too much into that. Nausea, diarrhea, constipation, so GI related stuff. All of these drugs have the same side effect profile, and by far the most common and the most debilitating one is nausea. So they are very potent appetite suppressants, which is one of the ways that they help with weight loss, and we'll talk a little bit about how they do that. But they can make you extraordinarily nauseated, and they are typically dosed once a week. So you may have a whole week worth of like relatively intense nausea in some cases, and of course when you're nauseated, the last thing you want to do is eat, and so that that is one way that they help you lose weight. So how do they work? You would think that they mainly work at the gut, and they certainly do, but they have some really interesting effects within the brain, in the thalamus and the hypothalamus. And this is a little cartoon here of these different neurons, and you can see here that GLP-1, it binds to these POMC/CART neurons. So POMC is pro-opiomelanocortin, and then CART, CART, is cocaine and amphetamine related transcript, so you could probably guess how they discovered those those neurons. But so it binds to those neurons. In addition to this blue neuron here that secretes GABA, and essentially it inhibits this little purple guy down here, which secretes neuropeptide Y. So neuropeptide Y is a major neuropeptide involved in promoting food intake and satiety. So it helps inhibit that. This is a little better maybe diagram of how these things work. So you stimulate these POMC/CART neurons, and you inhibit neuropeptide Y. And here's the effects down here at the bottom that really matter. So reduced hunger, so which leads to reduced energy intake. You just don't want to take in as many calories. And the interesting part is, and I've had patients as well as friends mention this to me, is they don't have the food cravings that they had before, which is really interesting. So, and that's a big problem when you're trying to stick, especially to a low-calorie diet, is, you're craving certain foods, whether it's, a lot of people crave sweets. If you're like me, you crave like crunchy, salty stuff, and it really like puts the damper on that. So extremely helpful, right? If for long-term weight loss. And then when you do finally eat, you stay full and you have that feeling of fullness for a prolonged period of time when you're using these drugs. So you're not going to overeat. You're not going to break down and binge on some of your favorite snacks and treats. You're not as likely to do that, at least when you're using one of these GLP-1 agonists. So it's really interesting. It has some pretty interesting effects on the brain. This is a little diagram here that shows all of the different ways that it affects various bodily organs, and I'm not going to run through all of this because we're mainly going to talk about the weight rebound issue. But I just want to give you a basic understanding of how these things work. They have very interesting effects within the brain, and then in the gut, they do slow gastric motility. So it takes longer for food, it enters your stomach, and it will take a substantially longer period of time for it to transit out of the stomach through the gut. And so that just makes you feel full for longer. And so it makes you less likely to continue to eat. It improves the secretion of insulin. It helps with dealing with fatty liver. So like I said, it kind of checks, on paper at least, it checks every single box that you would want to check if you were an obese diabetic or you had metabolic syndrome, that sort of thing. So these are really they're fascinating drugs. They're a major breakthrough in treating obesity and in treating type 2 diabetes. There's only one problem. When you stop taking these, you are very likely to regain the weight. This is from the journal Diabetes, Obesity, and Metabolism 2022. This is fairly recent. Weight regain and cardiometabolic effects after withdrawal of semaglutide. Step 1 trial extension. So the Step 1 trial was a study with semaglutide and lifestyle modification, and they saw how much weight these people lost, and they tracked a number of different metrics, which I'm going to show you here in a second. Things like blood pressure and hemoglobin A1C, and obviously body weight. But here's what's interesting. So to quote the paper, after having lost a mean of 17.3% of their body weight, right, very substantial, on semaglutide and 2% on placebo, this is at 68 weeks, they regained 11.6% of their body weight, and then the placebo regained 1.9%, resulting in a net losses of only 5.6%, and then for placebo, there was a wash for them, 0.1% at week 120. So they followed them out for 120 weeks. Substantial weight regain, okay, when they discontinued, when these people left the formal part of the study and went back to their old habits. We're going to talk a little bit about why that happens. So these are some charts from that I think are pretty interesting. So not surprisingly, when you lose that amount of weight, so this is systolic blood pressure and diastolic blood pressure, you're going to get nice drops in both. Systolic more than diastolic, obviously. But then look, here's this dotted line here. So this is when they stopped the medication, they started gaining weight again. I mean, it shouldn't come as a shock that blood pressure started going up as the pounds started coming back on again. And then the same here with hemoglobin A1C. Like profound drop in hemoglobin A1C, and then at week 68 when they stopped the medication, then they started getting fat again and started gaining weight. Hemoglobin A1C goes up, which is exactly what you would expect. So that's a problem. Now here's the thing. There's been some speculation online, and I've heard a number of other physicians say that this may be a problem that's inherent in the medication itself, that it will slow you. That there's something about it that slows metabolic rate. Maybe it accelerates the loss of healthy muscle tissue above and beyond what you would expect. I don't see any evidence that that's true at all. But there's problems when you lose that much weight. You have to be very cautious, and you have to have a game plan for what you're going to do after the medication. Now, some people may be on this forever. People who have like really out of control type 2 diabetes. This may just be a cornerstone medication if they can afford it, that they're going to be on for a long period of time. But certainly for people that are paying cash and they're using it for weight loss, if it's being prescribed and used the way that many of these clinics are doing it, you can almost, it's actually, it's a great business model for them, because you can almost guarantee that you're going to start gaining weight back when you discontinue those medicines if you don't have a game plan for what to do once the medication's gone. Like, if you go back to your old habits, you're going to start gaining the weight back. But also, if you lose a substantial amount of muscle tissue, which tends to happen when you go on a low-calorie diet plan, if you don't have a plan to address that and mitigate that, not only are you going to gain the weight back, but you may end up, with what's called, I hate the term, but it's going to be called metabolic damage, where you basically have screwed yourself in terms of your basal metabolic rate, and now you can't go back to eating the same number of calories that you did before, and you have to go back to eating substantially less than what you did before. So real quick, and that process, by the way, so there's a process that happens when you go on a weight loss plan, and it's called adaptive thermogenesis. So the body will, you will lose weight obviously if you eat less calories, but at some point the body's starts trying to fight you on it, starts putting the brakes on things a little bit, and so it will you'll notice that the amount of weight that you're losing over time begins to slow down, and there's a number of different reasons for that. This is a kind of a cool chart here that looks at your total TDEE, which is total daily energy expenditures, which is, this is all basically where you burn all your calories from. So the largest part of this, 70%, is your basal metabolic rate. So basal metabolic rate, these are all of the bodily processes that occur while you're at rest. They occur while you're sleeping. You're constantly burning calories just to do all the things that keep you alive, okay? And we'll talk about some of the major contributors to that. Now, NEAT is non-exercise activity thermogenesis. So this is just like the daily little movements that you do. It's fidgeting, it's getting up and down, and reaching for things, and just kind of, a lot of it's just unconscious. The interesting thing that happens as you begin to lose weight and you lose more and more weight, the body, the amount of calories that you burn, or the amount of NEAT activity that you do, goes down. So somebody that, for example, is super fidgety at a normal calorie intake, when they have been on a low calorie diet for many, many months, for example, if you were to film them and watch them, you'll notice, and compare to what they were doing before, they're not as fidgety. There's a lot less spontaneous movement, and this is like an unconscious thing that happens. It's not anything that people are doing intentionally, but it's one of the ways that the body kind of conserves energy and conserves calories, is there's just less spontaneous movement, which I think is kind of interesting that we're wired to do that. Okay, the other part here is, roughly 10% is thermic effect of food. So, in order to extract calories from food, you have to burn a certain number of calories. And, certain foods have more TEF than others, but this doesn't change a whole heck of a lot, as you lose weight. And then this is kind of depressing, only 5% of your total daily energy expenditure comes from EAT, which is exercise activity thermogenesis. So actively, going to the gym and working out, that sort of stuff. So it shows you can't exercise your way out of a bad diet. It's actually surprisingly, it's depressing how few calories, literally, going for a 5-mile run you should look up and see how many calories that burns. It's actually it's really depressing. So it's not very much. So the bulk of your daily calories are burned from your basal metabolic rate, and this is a big deal because this is your basal metabolic rate. When you have these massive weight changes, your basal metabolic rate takes a serious hit, and we're going to talk about that here some more. So, what makes up your basal metabolic rate? So, like the largest contributors. So, skeletal muscle mass is 20% of that. And then brain activity is another 20%. And then if you combine like liver and heart and like your GI tract and stuff, that's another like roughly 40%. But what does happen in most people, if not all people that have substantial amounts of weight loss, is that they, in addition to losing tremendous amounts of fat sometimes, they also lose a substantial amount of skeletal muscle tissue. And that is a huge problem. That is a huge problem. And that is why many of these people that lose a ton of weight on these GLP-1 drugs, if they don't have help with this, with that component of it, with the preservation of skeletal muscle, and they don't have a game plan for how to hold on to that muscle tissue, their basal metabolic rate is going to take a huge hit. And then when they come off of the medications, their metabolism has now slowed, and the weight's just going to pile right back on because they're going to maybe they're going to in many cases go back to eating the way that they did before, and then 6 months later they're going to dial up the clinic again and get another round of semaglutide or liraglutide, whatever the case may be, and then the process will repeat itself. So that's not ideal. That's not ideal. I think these medications are a huge help. But you don't want to be riding the merry-go-round on them and just, having to go on these, once or twice a year for the rest of your life just to keep your yo-yo weight gain under control. Ideally you want to use these once and just get a handle on things, and then hopefully never have to use them again. I mean, that's the ideal scenario. So there was, this is a really good example of what I'm talking about here, how crash dieting and massive amounts of weight loss really, like, you will metabolically screw yourself over in a huge way, and you will almost virtually guarantee that you're going to regain the weight. And the great example of that is that old show that used to be on television, was extremely popular, was The Biggest Loser. And for those of you guys that are not familiar with that show, if you get on YouTube, you can find old episodes of it. But they would get a group of morbidly obese individuals, like 300-400 plus pounders on there, and they would like basically take them to a locked, closed facility or a compound somewhere, and it became this competition, and they would put them on this ultra restrictive diet and sometimes have them exercise like 4 or 5 hours a day, and it was basically like a weight loss competition. In reality, in my opinion, it was extraordinarily unethical to do this to these people. I mean, I know they signed the waivers and they were all for it, but they really screwed these people over. If you look and see what happened to these contestants, almost all of them regained the weight back. And they not only did they get back to how big they were before, but many of them even surpassed that. And there's a reason for that. This is a paper actually that talks about what happened to these people, and it's actually really fascinating. So it's in the journal Obesity, so it's from 2016, Persistent Metabolic Adaptation 6 years after the Biggest Loser competition. So in a nutshell here, what they found was these people had presumably permanent 6 years later, presumably permanent decreases in their basal metabolic rate that virtually guaranteed that they were going to regain the weight. So they talk about it here. I've highlighted some of the pertinent parts here. It says weight loss at the end of the competition was, and this is a mean, 58.3 plus or minus 24.9 kilograms, so huge amounts of weight lost, right, in short periods of time. Resting metabolic rate decreased by 610 plus or minus 483 kilocalories per day. So that's a lot. Okay, that's the resting energy expenditure with that amount of weight loss. After 6 years, 41 plus or minus 31.3 kilograms of the lost weight was regained. Right, that's a huge amount of weight regain. And here's the kicker, while resting metabolic rate was 704 plus or minus 427 kilocalories below baseline. So even after they regain the weight, it's not like their resting metabolic rate went back to what it was before and everything was a reset like it never happened. They regained the weight, but they still were left with this sluggish metabolism, so which is a recipe for disaster. And I have there's a number of reasons why that happened. And I'm just going to touch on those briefly, but the reason I say that this is unethical is that the producers of the show may not have known this, but the trainers did. This is not like something that's unexpected. So there were medical professionals, there were physicians that were behind the scenes, and in some cases in front of the camera. I think in this show, they knew that this was going to happen to these people, yet they were getting paid big bucks, so they turned a blind eye to it. And the show was extraordinarily popular, but I wonder how many of the individuals that competed in this show, if they had known this was going to happen to them, if they had had full disclosure in the paperwork that they signed, would they have still gone ahead, and done the show? Maybe some of them probably loved the attention and would have still done it. I doubt that they provided these contestants with full informed consent and let them know that this is what's going to happen to your resting metabolic rate. So this is just a brief video right here about one of the contestants. I just got this off of YouTube, and it's just a brief video that I'm going to play for you guys, and to show you what happened to this poor guy and what he looks like today. So here it is.
When Ryan Benson joined the first season of The Biggest Loser, he weighed over 300 pounds, and after 5 grueling months of extreme workouts and dietary restrictions, he clocked in at just 208 pounds. But once the camera stopped rolling, Benson started slipping back into old habits almost immediately. He told Business Insider, "In my mind, I just thought I've been training so hard I want to eat something I craved for a few months. A burger, fries, some ribs. That was one of the things that propelled me to the finish line."
I just slipped back into my old habits really quick within the next year or two, and within about 4 or 5 years, I'd put back on all the weight.
So, he good for him for taking some of the responsibility, but this is not all entirely his fault. His metabolism, as far as we can tell, was permanently changed by that drastic weight loss. And you saw how much weight he lost. I think it was about 100 pounds or so. I mean, that's exactly the kind of weight loss that you can see with these drugs, okay? So it's I guess, taking Mounjaro in some cases can be the equivalent of going on The Biggest Loser show, maybe without all the hardcore exercise and the yelling and, that sort of, and the crying that I saw in some of the episodes. But the point is, this kind of drastic crash weight loss is not ideal, and it's a bit dangerous, and you have to have a plan to mitigate this. If I want to give you guys some tips that will help you avoid what happened to this guy. I don't want to talk you out of using these medications if you feel like you need them. I do think that they're safe, they are highly effective, but what bothers me is these clinics, one, they're charging you a ton of money, they're giving you the medication, and then they're sort of just like cleaning their hands and be like, and I think secretly they're like, we'll see you in 6 or 8 months, because they know you're going to gain the weight back. But they're not, in many cases, giving you a framework or a useful way to preserve your resting metabolic rate as much as possible while you're on the medication. So they're just giving you the meds. It's like, some of these old clinics that were out there that would just hand out like phentermine, basically like through a drive-through window. They didn't actually do that, but you get my point. They would just prescribe, phentermine, which is a potent appetite suppressant, and give them a handout on like an 800 calorie diet, and which again virtually guaranteed that all the weight that people lost would come right back. And then they knew they would come back, and they'd give them more phentermine, and here's your handout again. And it just became this yo-yo cycle, and it became extremely frustrating for patients. And the whole time they're doing, probably permanent damage to these people's resting metabolic rate. If you're going to use one of these medications, what can you do to mitigate some of these problems, okay? So this is a cool paper here. This is the key, all right? Preserving healthy muscle during weight loss, all right? This is from the American Society of Nutrition. It's a 2017 article, and it talks about some things you can do. So the key, I tell this to my patients all the time. You guys that are listening to this are probably sick and tired of me harping on it, but if you're going to be in a calorie deficit for a sustained period of time, it is imperative that you do everything in your power to minimize the amount of lean muscle tissue that you lose, specifically muscle mass, because again, that's a major contributor to your basal metabolic rate. Okay, it's your brain and your muscles. Your brain's not going to shrivel up on a low-calorie diet. There's mechanisms out there to prevent that. Okay, but you certainly can lose a lot of muscle tissue if you don't do things correctly, and that's why my prediction is in a year or two, Charles Barkley is going to be back being right as big as he was before, and Elon maybe too. I don't know. But you have got to have a plan in place. Ideally, you're doing it before you even start these medications, but certainly once you start them, you have to have a plan in place to hold on to your lean muscle tissue. Okay, so how do you do that? First of all, you have to have a high protein intake, and it's a lot higher than what you might think, and it's a lot higher than many physicians recommend. So this is the Journal of the International Society of Sports Nutrition. This is their 2017 position statement on protein and exercise. Really good paper. If you really want to know how much protein you need, this paper will tell you. But I've highlighted something here that's relevant. It's recommendation here number 3. Higher protein intakes, 2.3 to 3.1 grams per kilo per day, may be needed to maximize the retention of lean body mass in resistance-trained subjects during hypocaloric periods. So this is a lot more than the upper limit, which we generally think of as like maybe 2.2 grams per kilo for gaining muscle tissue when you're in a calorie surplus. If you go above 2.2, the benefits really are not there. But when you're in a low-calorie state, there is some benefit to higher protein intake, according to the International Society of Sports Nutrition, who's looked at this very closely in terms of preserving lean muscle tissue. And it's possible also that number might even be higher if you're elderly. We probably need some more data on that, but I would not be surprised if perhaps you need 3.5 if you're like somebody who's over the age of 65, okay? So I generally recommend, they say up to 3.1, just to make the math easy. I usually say 3 grams per kilogram, per day, divided up over 5 to 6 meals. And that's per kilogram of lean body mass. And if you want to know what your lean body mass is, you can go online and find a calculator and look at that. Resistance training is the next one. This is a paper here, Clinical Physiology and Functional Imaging from 2014, Lift Weights to Fight Overweight. All right, that says it right there. And I'm not going to get into all the details of this study, but basically, if you lose weight and you purely just use caloric restriction, you are going to lose a substantial amount of lean muscle tissue. If you're engaged in resistance exercise, the amount of muscle tissue that you lose is drastically reduced, and in some test subjects in this particular paper, they actually lost no lean muscle tissue when they were engaged in regular relatively intense high intensity lifting. So you have got to lift, and you have got to consume quite a bit more protein than maybe you are accustomed to. Okay. So then, the other part of this is that there are potentially some nutritional supplements and some nutritional strategies in addition to high protein that you could potentially use. The data on these they're not overwhelming, but I consider this to be kind of low-hanging fruit and probably good for you anyway in other areas. But there is some data saying that optimizing your vitamin D3 level can do this. That high doses of fish oil, particularly in elderly people, can help preserve and actually build lean muscle tissue, especially like in older females who are weightlifting. And then there's the supplement that you may have heard of called HMB, beta hydroxymethylbutyrate. It's a metabolite of leucine, and there is some modest data out there that shows that it can help not only build lean muscle tissue in a calorie surplus, but also potentially mitigate some of the lean tissue loss that you would get in a low-calorie diet. So I'm actually currently dieting right now. I put 5 grams of HMB into one of my protein shakes every day. The powder itself it's absolutely vile. So you have to mix it in with some juice, or I mix it into a protein shake. But there's actually like reasonably good data on that it it can improve muscle mass, it can improve strength, It can help you hold on to some of your hard-earned lean muscle tissue. And then, finally, guys, this goes without saying, but I'm going to say it anyway. You have to address the fundamental psychological issues and stressors and whatever baggage you carry, whether you're consciously aware of it or not, that has led you to overeat in the past, that's led you to binge, and has led you to develop, many of the unhealthy habits that led to you being obese in the first place. If you don't get some help with that, if you don't either do the internal work yourself, or probably more beneficial is to find a therapist who can help you unlock some of that stuff. As you're going through this weight loss program while you're on this medication, you need to explore that a little bit and, start answering those tough questions like, how did I get here in the first place? And if you don't do that, again, you're going to slide back into your old habits, and that's unfortunate. That's just something that happens. So it's well documented that psychological stressors can lead to overeating. This is a paper right here, Neuroscience Behavioral Review, 2017, Stress, Overeating, and Obesity, Insights from Human Studies and Preclinical Models. They show the graph here. Psychological stress, both in animal models and in humans, tends to lead to binge eating, which of course leads into a net calorie surplus and eventually potentially to obesity, type 2 diabetes, etc. So, that sometimes out of all of the things that you need to do as part of this program, this is the hardest stuff because it's uncomfortable. But if you don't address it, you may be guaranteeing weight regain. Okay. So just to summarize things, guys, these GLP-1 drugs, they're not, I hate to call anything a wonder drug, but they are highly effective for diabetics. They're highly effective for people struggling with obesity. They should really just be used for people with those two conditions. There's a lot of these Hollywood weirdos that are using them for vanity purposes. But if you're going to use these drugs and you have a substantial amount of weight to lose, you really, in my opinion, you need to come up with a comprehensive plan for what you're going to do when you stop the medication. And that begins like right on day one. And your priorities need to be preservation of lean muscle tissue using all the techniques that I just mentioned here, and then addressing the psychological issues and stressors that led you to become obese in the first place. Because if you don't do that, you're almost guaranteeing weight regain. The studies are very clear in these patients that when they were kind of cut loose from the studies and just left to their own devices, you saw what happened. The weight just came right back on again. So I don't want that to happen to you guys, because otherwise you're going to have to go back on the medication again and do it all over again, and you're going to be yo-yoing just like people used to do on phentermine. So please make this medication is not in and of itself going to fix your problem, but it needs to be part of like a comprehensive problem. It needs to be part of a comprehensive program to get you where you want to be in terms of your health and your body composition. So, unfortunately, a lot of clinics that are selling this stuff they're not providing that additional support, which I think is a bit wrong. So that's all I have for you guys today. If you're on one of these medications and you're not getting support from the clinic that prescribed them, or you have questions on how to mitigate some of these problems, I'm happy to work with you. You can get a hold of me through the website. We can work together on how to, if you're going to use these drugs, how to get the most out of them, and hopefully how to guarantee that you don't ever have to get back on them again, because ultimately that's the goal. All right, guys, that's all I got. I hope you enjoyed this. If you have experience with these drugs, positive or negative, leave me some comments, because I always love to hear from you guys. So I will catch you next time. All Man Medicine video and audio has been created and shared online for informational purposes only. This podcast does not constitute the practice of medicine or professional healthcare services of any kind, including the giving of medical advice. I am not your doctor. No doctor-patient relationship has been established. This content is not meant to be a substitute for professional medical advice and should not be relied upon solely for that purpose either. The only purpose of this content is to present peer-reviewed, research-backed health information for your consideration. As always, rely on the advice and guidance of your personal physician before undertaking any activity presented here, and if in doubt or not comfortable with said activity, Practice discretion. Your health is your responsibility and not ours. Finally, I take conflicts of interest seriously. I accept no compensation whatsoever from any private corporations, including pharmaceutical or supplement companies. You can trust that if I recommend a medication, product, or service, it's because I genuinely believe in it and not because I'm being paid to endorse it.